Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and give a nice, warm LinkedIn welcome for your host of today's speaker series, Rochelle Diamond.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Rochelle Diamond. I'm on our employee experience team here at LinkedIn, and I run our speaker series. Before we start, I always like to remind everyone why we do the speaker series. Our goal is to bring inspiring ideas and innovative thinkers to our employees and our members to make them more productive and successful. And you can always watch all the past amazing, inspiring, and innovative speaker series from the past at speakers.linkedin.com. We just redid the website. It's very beautiful. Go check it out. And we also have a podcast channel on iTunes, so you can check it out there too. So I'm really excited to introduce to you today our guest speaker, Beth Simone Noveck. A lawyer by training, a techie by inclination, Beth works to build data transparency into government. She's the Jerry Holton Global Network professor at NYU School of Engineering, and she's also runs the Governance Lab, which is an organization dedicated to improving governance in governments. Say that 10 times fast. And elsewhere. She was the former Deputy Chief Technology Officer of the United States, and she led Obama's Open Government Initiative. Based in the White House's Office of Science and Technology Policy, she's an expert in technology and institutional innovation. Today, she's going to talk to us about a very important topic, the tech presidency, governing in an age of big data and machine learning. And with the election right around the corner, she's going to take stock of what we've accomplished to date and talk to us about what remains to be done to achieve a new vision for government using new technology, no matter who is elected. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the stage Beth Simone Noveck.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm really delighted and honored to be here, and it's a particularly exciting week to be here at LinkedIn with the big news of last week, which I can't top. But I hope to connect it a little bit because I think what's been going on here is extremely relevant to what might go on in Washington and in Sacramento and the capitals of the world and elsewhere, and I hope to have a few minutes to talk to you about that. I want to, in addition to thanking Rochelle for being here, I want to apologize to all of you. I came a few days early to enjoy some hiking in West Marin, where it is much colder than it is here, and I now have a little bit of laryngitis and a frog in my throat, so I apologize preemptively. So I'm here to talk about big, messy, difficult, hard problems, right? Nothing easy. I was last week, just a few days ago, at the White House for a summit that they put on criminal justice reform, right? It's just one of many problems. 2.2 million people behind bars. That's up from 500,000 people just 30 years ago. We have 25% of the world's prisoners in the United States. It's costing us $80 billion a year, with a disproportionate impact, of course, on people of color. After our exciting, engaging, and uplifting meeting to talk about what we could do, we were quickly shuttled out the left side because in from the right side had to come the 300 people convening to talk about organ donation and organ transplants. Another incredible challenge that we're facing about how to bridge the gap between the 95% of people who say they support organ donation and the 50% of people who do. I could go on. There's a litany of problems captured well in the Sustainable Development Goals to which 193 countries under the aegis of the UN have signed on, to say there are major problems that we are all facing and working towards, whether it's clean water, clean air, energy, sustainability of our planet and people. We all know that the problems we face are grave and that they're complex. And the major challenge is not that we lack the science, not that we lack the technology, not that we lack the know-how for solving them, but I would argue today that we lack the institutions that can allow us to spot, to identify, and then above all to implement the innovative good ideas that could help us to tackle these problems, to do things better and to do things differently. These institutions are outdated not simply because of problems of corruption that come from working behind closed doors. Even if we assume the best motives, in the 20th century we had to build institutions where we brought the so-called best and brightest to one place to make decisions and to solve problems, because that in an era before the internet was the best way to organize expertise, the best way to find the information, and the best way to make decisions effectively. But the problem is we're now in the 21st century, and this has tremendous consequences. Not only that working behind closed doors creates the temptation to do things illegally and unlawfully, but it makes it very hard to get at the intelligence that we need to do things well. So take, for example, the problem in California of how many kids we are prosecuting as adults rather than as juveniles. You know what the answer is? I don't know. Nobody knows. That's the problem. We don't know. And there are countless questions like this where we don't have the most basic information about how we're working that could allow us actually to solve these problems. We do, however, today have the technology increasingly that can allow us to transform how institutions are working, that can allow us to bring in new ideas from outside. And it's urgent that we do so, because the rates of trust in government that we're facing, frankly, the rates of trust that we have in all traditional institutions, be it religion, be it the media, and especially government, is at an all-time low. It's not to say, however, that the solution is we should get rid of government. It's not to say that all institutions are facing corruption challenges. There is a tremendous opportunity for a new role for government in this day and age. And a lot of Americans, I have to say, do agree. And in the same polls where people say they don't trust government, they say we need government to regulate and manage issues like infrastructure and environment and even immigration. Even areas where people are tremendously partisan in their views about how we should do things still see there to be a role for institutions. And the challenges, and the thing I would put to you is that that role for institutions today is to become more open and to become the stewards of a conversation between institutions and the American public around how we work. So Margaret Mead said this famous quote, of course, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world." I would argue that given the challenges that we face, and especially in the era of the internet, we don't need a few citizens. We need all citizens engaged. We need lots and lots of people, all hands on deck, actually working on these hard problems. And that's where our institutions come in. That's the agenda that I would put to you is the central goal for the next administration and future administrations, is to be able to move beyond thinking about democracy and engagement as something we do once a year at best at the polling booth, and to think about it as something that we're doing on an ongoing basis, where we have institutions that know how to have a conversation with us about the things we know and can do, to tap into our skills, expertise, and know-how, and allow us to contribute for the greater good. Your future boss, so to speak, Bill Gates, in his annual letter that Bill and Melinda Gates put out to they do an annual New Year's letter, the last December, called for the creation of a global database of citizens. We need everybody connected in fighting global poverty, they said. We can use technology, as they are doing here in California. How many people, by the way, are signed up for Pulsepoint? I'm curious. Not a lot of hands in the room. No hands in the room, in fact. I can't see the virtual room, and I'm going to hope the answer is better. Because when I talk about people contributing their skills and working with government to solve a problem, there's no better example than this one from right in our backyard. So what does Pulsepoint do? It takes an open data feed of 911 calls coming in. It registers people with one single skill, the ability to perform CPR. And then when somebody, God forbid, has a heart attack or an accident, it geolocates the person who can use the defibrillator with the person who's having the heart attack or the accident, and it allows you to come to their aid to perform bystander CPR. So when Pulsepoint first gets started in California, this is the coverage of traditional government first response, fire, police, the government coming to your aid when you have an accident. After they get started, this becomes the coverage of first response. Citizens working together with government to solve a very hard problem, saving lives. And in the last 2 years, they've been activated and saved already 8,000 lives using this system. They have something similar in the UK. where they're doing this called Good Sam, registering off-duty doctors, nurses, etc. Because chances are the person sitting next to you on the bar stool may be an off-duty doctor, may be an ambulance driver whose skills could be put to good use to save lives. Now step back. That's the future. When I get into government in 2009 at the start of the Obama administration, this is my desktop. And I have the bright idea, of course, we're going to change the world, right? We're going to use technology to do things differently. Let's be more open and get good ideas in from the outside. Let's put a blog on the White House website. You may not remember this, and it's not there anymore, but we took comments. Ooh, never take comments on the White House website, lest you want to be in the New York Times. But we did come with the intention, and we've done a lot of good things have happened since, to do things differently. The president, on his first day in office, he signed the Memorandum on Transparency and Open Government, calling for changing the way that government works according to 3 values. We're going to be more transparent, we're going to be more participatory, and we're going to be more collaborative. That means in the first place, when we talk about being more transparent, that means opening up the data that government holds so that we can become more data-driven in how we make decisions. We're awash in data. I didn't use any LinkedIn stats here, just your Tinder stats. We got a lot of data, right? And we have now, thanks to some of this work, a policy, not just in the United States, but in dozens of countries and cities and states all around the world, to make at least the data that government collects and holds, as it regulates companies, for example, as it does its job as protector of workplace safety, the environment, and other causes, making that data open and available online, so that more people can use that information to solve hard problems. The classic one, the first instance of this being, of course, the release of transit data, so that, you know, the teenager in his basement can make the app that tells you when your bus or your subway is coming. It's not a story, the open data and the data story is ultimately not a story just about tech, right? It's a story about collaboration and about people coming together to solve problems. So in the state of Rajasthan in India, they take the data that government collects about how it spends money, and they paint it on the walls of villages. And then they have these performances where they read the budget data. That's an exciting show. But what happens is people can then point out there is a bridge that was built to nowhere. There's someone on the payroll who died and shouldn't be on the payroll. It's a story of collaboration around data. Collaboration which we're seeing now increasingly not just around data that government is making available, but also that companies and academic institutions and others are making available. So classically, we can think about Twitter making available Twitter data to a place like the University of Wollongong in Australia so that they can build flood maps and emergency response maps to help people in Jakarta better plan for disaster relief and recovery. When we make data available, as we're increasingly doing, it allows us to be able to monitor conditions in real time on the ground in ways that we've had a hard time doing up until now. So the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Washington, the weather that powers the app on your phone, has been releasing data for quite some time, allowing us to better predict wildfires and floods and storms, etc. But then think also about the data that Intel is releasing from the sensors that it is using together with UC Davis, soil sensors that are allowing farmers to optimize their irrigation, increase their crop yields. Again, the collaboration around data from public sources, from private sources to solve public problems. It allows us, of course, when we open up this data, not just to solve problems out there, but to hopefully make government work better. So there's a movement now afoot through, pushed very much through a group of which, disclosure, I'm on the board of the Open Contracting Partnership, which is pushing governments around the world, including in Slovakia, to make its contracting data available. When we make that data available, then we can see how many government tenders went to your brother-in-law, and how many went to big businesses versus small businesses, and hopefully to decrease corruption and increase competitiveness and entrepreneurship. When you open up this data, as they've done in Mexico, you can then easily see, and this was a project done not by the government itself, but by a collection of NGOs working with the government, to see that, lo and behold, of the money spent on education, 1,512 teachers on the payroll all have the same birthday, 12, 12, 12, making them, what year is it? 104 years old, all of whom live in the same place, right? So then you can eliminate those people in the payroll, and we can make government more efficient in lots of ways that we're seeing today. It allows us, when we start to work with data, to then uncover problems that are happening in our communities that are often hiding in plain sight. So in Zanesville, Ohio, when they opened up the public data that the government held about water usage, only then were they able to see that, curiously, if you were African American, you were not receiving city water, clean city water, but instead had to go fetch water from a well or from other sources, and that disproportionately only white residents of Zanesville actually had access to clean water, leading to a lawsuit and eventually, of course, not only to damages, but to a change in this practice. But in many places, government doesn't even have the basic infrastructure or the capacity to collect this data. So in Afghanistan, they haven't done a census since 1979. So FlowMinder, using commercial mobile phone data, microcensus data from households, satellite data, is able to stand in place where there's a lack of government capacity to provide the data that actually allows us to see poverty where it exists and to monitor conditions on the ground. It's also a story, interestingly, not just about making government work better or doing the traditional things that we think of government as doing, like disaster relief and recovery. But this making more data available is also potentially having the effect of spurring economic growth and tech innovation as well. So if you're in New York City and you are Starbucks, you have access to all the market data that you need to know where to put your coffee shop on every single corner in New York City, right? But if I am mom and pop jewelry store or cafe owner, how am I supposed to know where to open my business? So the city opens up its data, builds a website called the New York City Business Atlas, giving you access to market information and business intel that allows you as a small entrepreneur to know where to site and start your business. And there's lots of evidence, and it's something we're tracking through not only our team at GovLab, but countries around the world through a project called the Open Data 500, are looking at exactly how this asset of open government data, public information, is enabling businesses, big ones and small ones, to create jobs and create economic growth. And you know what? Our colleagues at Columbia Business School have done the research to show that even though they're working with an open asset like open data that anyone can use, it creates no decrease in the investment in those businesses. Ultimately, what this data story of data-driven government does, the technology that allows us to use information in new ways, I'm coming back to this idea that ultimately it's about the conversation. It's about getting more eyeballs on the problem. So that in Indonesia, for example, in the aftermath of the elections, they're able to stand up a crowdsourcing website, 2 days, $56, 700 volunteers, using the polling polling booth data to then monitor improprieties in the election. UN doing something similar around sharing data, again, this time not just public, but also getting companies to share data to take action in the fight against climate change. It helps us to bridge the significant talent gap that we have in government. I may be, and Rochelle announced that I'm a professor at the NYU School of Engineering, but as she said, I'm actually a lawyer by training, as are most people who go into public sector, who have gone to law schools or public policy schools, and who therefore aren't trained typically in data science, in computer science, who don't have a technology or engineering background. And so it allows us, when we open up the data, to reach out to people, as the University of Geneva is doing together with One.org, in crowdsourcing people from outside government to then look at problems, to look at the data, and to try to advance, in this case, the Sustainable Development Goals. So this idea of greater access to data, more tech-driven, evidence-based governing comes with a lot of potential benefits. But the primary benefit, and the one that I want to make sure to talk about, is that it allows us to get more people involved. And so there's also an interesting story unfolding about the ways in which government is starting to use technology, in particular data-driven technologies, to capture what people know to get all hands on deck. We started doing this a lot many years ago already. Government started asking people what they feel, right? We poll people all the time. How do you feel about this policy? And that's grown into projects like We the People. And you might have heard this in the aftermath of Orlando, of course. Petitions went up in connection with banning assault rifles and pushing for gun control. It's a place where people can actually, what it sounds like, post a petition. Anyone posted a petition or signed a petition? Can I put you on the spot? What was the petition? The assault rifle ban. One more? Yeah. Also, but you hadn't been on it before, interestingly. Or you had? One more. Build a Death Star! Build a Death Star to be outstripped only by... You didn't sign the Deport Justin Bieber Back to Canada petition, did you?
So this was about the need to reform high-tech immigration in US.
The high-tech immigration one. So it's a way in which, not that you're ordinary people, you are extraordinary people, but regular folk, shall we say, are able to put an issue on the agenda, to bring attention to an issue. It's not to say that assault weapons wouldn't have been an issue this week anyway, but what's the challenge with this, though, is it is a naked demand, right? It's a do something. Deport Justin Bieber back to Canada. So if I'm sitting in the immigration department, I don't know what to do with this. It doesn't give me the know-how that I need to actually implement the policy, which is why we're seeing a move towards using technology to go beyond just asking people how they feel. You don't like assault weapons. Maybe you do like assault weapons. I don't know. To getting people to engage around what they can do. So in São Paulo, Brazil's largest city, recognizing that the municipality does not have a monopoly on tech and innovation know-how, right? They recognize they were not trained as engineers either. They said, we're going to turn civil service training on its head. And we're going to create an open civil service training school. And beginning last November, they launched 24 courses taught by citizens for civil servants. And 7,000 government employees took the courses. And they have another 7,000 enrolled this semester. And by the way, you get paid. So if you would like a vacation in São Paulo, your tech training would be very much welcome. Or you can contribute what you know. Lots of examples now of using brainstorming websites to contribute ideas, to go next step beyond just your feelings, to actually contribute your know-how and your abilities. I very much got my start in doing this work because more than 10 years ago I was teaching a class in intellectual property before I was an engineering professor and I was actually a law professor. And I was teaching how people get a patent and explaining to my students that a bureaucrat has 15 hours in which to decide whether you get a 20-year grant of monopoly rights. Well, this was the beginning of the social media era, right? And my students said, that is crazy. What do you mean one person has 15 hours to make that kind of a decision? So we said, let's build a website that will allow us to get input from scientists and technologists to improve how the Patent Office examines patents. Fast forward to 2011, and the federal government, inspired by this idea, launches challenge.gov. One more quick straw poll. How many people have submitted something on challenge.gov? Ooh, a low number. How many people have heard of challenge.gov before? 1, 2, blah. Yeah, it's a long way from Washington here. Government is not very good at marketing. They will, that I can tell you. This is the greatest need for innovation. So what is it? It's what it sounds like. It's a challenge website. Think Incentive you have heard of. 450 now, probably 500 federal government agencies post problems up there, like how do I reduce the salt from saltwater to improve farming? How do I reduce the word gap between the number of words a rich child hears before the time they're 5 and a poor child hears? So asking people, again, not to share their opinions, but to share their know-how. The problem with this is what I would call the problem of the open call, right? It's all fine, but the reason government today doesn't look any different than it did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and depending on your views on the election, you might think it looks worse, is that the act of saying, hello, is anyone out there who can solve my problem, is not a very effective way to tap into the talent that people have. There's a huge number of smart people in this room. who have not been on challenge.gov to solve a problem, who have not even posted a petition on or signed a petition. And so Mark Wilson, the trauma surgeon who founded the Good Sam Project, he uses this I find this very compelling, and I have no idea why. He says you are never more than 200 meters from a spider. There must be basis in the literature for that. And you're never more than 200 meters from a doctor. But the problem is it's hiding in plain sight, right? We can't find that person. It's hard to find that needle in the haystack. And until we can tap into the technologies that will actually enable us to find the people who have the know-how and match them to opportunities to do public good, something that should resonate, I think, here of all places tremendously, we're going to have a hard time changing how government ultimately works. We're going to have a hard time overcoming the cultural problem that right now it's very hard for people in government to even ask a question. So we had this idea when I was there a few years ago that Quora was new then, right? We would use Quora. There was Yahoo Answers was still around, Google Answers. We would use these sites to try to tap into people's know-how more effectively. We couldn't get anybody willing to ask a question. In a highly partisan environment, it was very hard to get people to say, I don't know. People are not used to what you are used to. Going onto Stack Exchange and saying, hey, I need a line of code to do X, or how many times should I water my begonia this week? It's very hard to do that in a culture in which for so long we have had to work behind closed doors, very much because of the notion that government, for good reasons, right? Government is supposed to be the steward of the public trust. They're supposed to know what they're doing with your taxpayer dollars. And therefore saying, I don't know is very difficult. So there is no culture of agile. There is no concept of how many times should I water my begonia. Instead, we have things called advisory committees. We get 12 people together, we charter a committee, they come to Washington, they meet for 3 years, they write a PDF, big report, and then they go home. That's how we get expertise. And you wonder why we still have a problem with lobbying in Washington? It's because it's really hard to get information in institutions that don't know how to go beyond the open call, the hello, is anybody out there, to actually figuring out, you know. What do you know? Something about data science, something about marketing, something about the marketing people we really need, right? Something about how to build a better website. Something that increasingly governments are learning how to do in places, for example, like British Columbia, where they have started in Vancouver the British Columbia Developers Exchange. And they've built a directory of the skills and know-how of the developers in their community so that they can reach out to them for every government website they need to build, for every public service they need to deliver. They can both do the thing that more and more we're doing, which is human-centered design, talking to our end users, but also trying to talk to those people with relevant kinds of expertise. So I don't have time to talk about any of these in detail, but I want to say there is a move afoot now to begin to think about how do we use, whether it's tools like LinkedIn or other tools, as Health and Human Services is using, to tap into what people know. Because you know what, in Health and Human Services, they have the job of examining medical devices to make sure that they are safe and won't kill you, and at the same time to make sure they get to market quickly so that the entrepreneurs and the employees of those entrepreneurs have a job tomorrow. But what's the problem? The people who examine medical devices are used to examining, stents and Band-Aids and pacemakers, and now a medical device, you've got an app on your phone that is a medical device. And so we don't have the know-how. You have a 3D printed, weird kind of artificial tissue, which is a medical device. We need the know-how. So what are they doing? Building a directory of the biomedical knowledge of 100,000 people in HHS so they can more quickly get at that expertise. So that expertise, though, often looks not just like credentials. You have a PhD in biosciences. But as the World Bank is doing, they're looking to track, using their own expert network, the experiences of their 27,000 employees in the World Bank. They want to know, where have you worked in the world? Have you worked in West Africa? That would be really useful to know when you're confronting a problem like Ebola. Have you worked in Latin America? Have you managed a pandemic? Have you been involved in Zika or chikungunya or dengue? Really useful things you would want to know that sadly are not very transparent from titles in the public sector like deputy director and assistant manager of this, that, and the other thing. And to make it more usable to people, they've built a help desk to go with it. Since people aren't used to using a database to find people, particularly, so they've built a hotline where you call with your question, and then the people on the hotline actually use the database to figure out what people know. Lots of examples of this, of course, in your own backyard. The work that LinkedIn's public sector practice has been doing with Colorado to do a better job of making the skills of citizens in the private sector more visible have potentially tremendous ramifications for what we can do also in the public sector. So Podemos, the upstart political party in Spain, is at the beginnings of creating what they call Banco de Talentos, right? The skills network of the people in their party to figure out how they can deploy them for public good, for volunteering purposes, and to help not only the government, but to help one another. This is a bit of a failed project in Torfaen, a little county in Wales. Failed because it was a well-intentioned project, quite under-resourced, but with a great nub of an idea, which is the citizens in our own backyard have tremendous expertise. Well, about what? About things like diabetes and Alzheimer's. Well, if I want to know about diabetes and Alzheimer's, I can go on WebMD. What do I need this for? Because a person living in Torfaen knows about what it means to have diabetes in Torfaen. Where are the social services that are available to me? Where are the handicapped access? Which doctor should I go to? So a highly localized version of this with the idea, again, of connecting people based on what they know. We have a long way to go to get us there. We got to change some laws that make it difficult for us to do this today. We've got to do more of the work that's going on here to build new systems of credentials and badges, right, and to associate credentials with skills. So when you go to NYU, my institution's School of Professional Studies, they will give you a badge that you can put on your LinkedIn page and that's searchable to everybody. It's what makes the announcement last week potentially particularly promising and interesting when we think about its applications for public services. When I have suddenly access to tremendous new sources of data about what people know and can do, then we can begin to think about how do we deploy it for public good. So let me begin to close by talking about what Rochelle stated at the outset. Where are we now and how do we get to this reality? How do we realize this vision, this twofold vision of better government through data and better government through people, for lack of a better word? We've done a lot to date. In terms of personnel, we now have governments that have people called things like Chief Technology Officer, Chief Information Officer. You all know there's now a Chief Data Scientist sitting in the White House. You've all heard of him. And now there's a Chief Data Scientist thanks to the White House picking DJ. Now the Department of Commerce has a Chief Data Scientist, and he has 34 people working for him. And governments are starting to copy this trend. So we are moving towards the accretion of more roles that are focused on tech and innovation for doing good. We also have a set of policies that are helping to support this innovative roadmap. So whether it's the open government agenda that I mentioned at the beginning, or whether it's the policies now around opening up data and making open data increasingly the default in terms of what we do in government, we have a set of policies and laws that are allowing us to move towards a more open, collaborative, and data-driven universe. We've also created the law that allows us to have prizes. So challenge.gov, a prize-backed challenge platform, required a change in the law that allowed federal agencies to offer prizes to people like you and to me to solve problems. And then, of course, this story wouldn't be complete without the advances that we've made on introducing new platforms in government. We've had rules and laws around transparency for eons, right? Every administration comes in and says, we will be more open. We have a Freedom of Information Act, and we're going to use it. That doesn't change until you create a data.gov, a place to find the data and make the data searchable. You can have a law on prize-backed challenges, but without challenge.gov and a place to put your challenges and find them, it doesn't become real in practice. So where do we go from here, though? A lot of strides have been made, and this is, by all measures, has been what many have referred to as the first real tech presidency. Obama was at South by Southwest talking about the central role. He was here, in fact, at LinkedIn not too long ago, talking about the central role that tech actually plays in enabling us to achieve social good. But we have to do more. We have to do much, much more to make government not only a purveyor of data, opening up data about when the buses and subways are coming, but to become the user of its own data. So take for a moment just the thought that Chicago is the only city in the country that uses its data about restaurant inspections to change how it inspects restaurants, right? Instead, most cities just go down the list, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then we go back and we inspect all the restaurants. Chicago has developed a predictive model which allows it to guess that dodgy taco truck outside the door is the more likely place that we're going to contract salmonella. You have to live in New York to understand the reference to the dodgy taco truck that is outside my door, I might add, and which I have to smell every day. So the point is that we have to actually, if we're going to realize operational benefits, performance benefits, we're actually going to have to do more with data and to become consumers of our data. That's going to mean, though, we have to strengthen our analytic capacity in government, whether it's by building up the number of people who are internal to the public service or bringing in people from outside on things like presidential innovation fellowships, getting people to do a stint in government, or simply doing a better job to match people who are in the problems in the public sector with people in the private sector who want to help. We're going to have to strengthen that capacity if we're going to be able to achieve more evidence-based decision making and allow us to create those kinds of collaborations. Finally, we're going to have to build our culture of innovation. That means much more co-design, co-creation, and collaboration between citizens, with citizens, companies, and government. This new kind of institutional infrastructure that's going to allow us to work in new ways that are both more evidence-based, but are also more participatory. And as a result, are going to be, I think, more effective. What does that mean that the rest of us have to do? So government has to change. We have to rethink how institutions work. But if we want to actually match people based on what they know and can do to public problems, we need more employers being willing to catalog what people's skills are, what their know-how is, and make that shareable for public purposes. Then we can think about what I like to think of as Tinder for government, right? It's matching people based on their interests to serve in new ways. That is the future. That is the future of using data-driven tools to connect us to opportunities to serve that speak to our talent and know-how and ability. That's going to happen when we share what we know and when we're willing to give back. When we're willing to bring our maker tech culture out of Silicon Valley and bring it to our public institutions and public problems so that we can do well by doing good, so that we can use the tech, again, to break open the doors and that can allow us to do the hard work of reinvigorating citizenship, of rebuilding our institutions, and of strengthening our democracy. So with that, let me close and invite those people who have comments, questions, reactions. There's a mic, I believe, in the center. And I am open and game to any and all questions. And no, I do not know who will win the election. Let me just state that at the outset. Please.
Hi, thank you for coming. I feel a lot of energy from you, and I think you give a lot of great examples. I think we're all very appreciative of those. I think one of the things that I feel is that, during like elections and so forth, there's people, you can mobilize a lot of energy, right, for a government-related project, which is electing a candidate, right? But other times, I mean, people, I think everybody feels like, oh, I'm busy, I might do some volunteering, whatever. But a lot of people, the only time they participate in government things is basically, I want to oppose some project that's, coming into my backyard, not in my backyard kind of thing. Like here we have high-speed rail and so forth. So this is sort of a weird question I want to ask you, but tell us about like what motivates you, like what personally drives you, and then so that we can kind of understand like what how do we get that drive?
So first, let me say nobody understands incentives better than people at LinkedIn, right? So I'm sort of hoping you can answer this question for me, since you uniquely managed to get people to share a lot of information about themselves. Because it taps into a need that people have, right, to become part of the economy, to seek a job, to get employed. And this has always been one of the great impediments to more participatory forms of engagement in democracy. People won't participate. They have no incentive to do so. They're too busy. Underlying that, by the way, is the unspoken undercurrent, which is they're too stupid. So there's a lot of distrust that comes packaged with that. And I think obviously what we've seen in terms of open source ways of working, right, the great surprise that was Wikipedia, the great surprise which was open source software. Remember when that was remarkable? When people said, oh, nobody would. Who would write software in a shared way? Who would post on an encyclopedia, on a website, right? The whole web has answered that question in part, and yet not for government. And the question is why? And I would say that and I will try to. I'll try to answer the personal psychological, psychiatric question. It might be as to what motivates me. But I think in part, government has not asked. We don't have well-defined, clear processes, right? The kind of clearly chunked small question that tells me what I should do. So on challenge.gov, the great thing about challenge.gov is like Wikipedia, it has clear rules and instructions what it means to participate. E-petitions works because it's clear to people what it means to sign a petition. But for most other forms of engagement, other than, let's say, volunteering in my kid's school, or some of you may remember Net Day, like a bajillion years ago when people went around and wired the schools in California and then elsewhere. You went to lay cable. You got what that meant. But in most cases, it's much too opaque what it means to participate. So until we actually ask defined questions, it becomes there's very little incentive to participate. And then let's also get past the fact that not everything should be about providing information back to government. Some of it needs to be about, and that's where challenge.gov is really interesting and successful, putting the problem out to people and letting people solve it in the way that they choose and the way that they best know how. So there's many questions, I could obviously go on about this, so let me just say one last thing on this score, which is the other big impediment has been the tendency to think about participation as being something mass-based. It only works if we have one size fits all and everybody's interested in it, like voting. Everybody gets that, we all have to do that. But the truth is we need the long tail of participation, and we don't need everybody to participate, right? You may want to work on assault weapons, and you may want to work on immigration policy, and there you are. And then someone else may want to work on something else. And the point is, unless we have a multiplicity of opportunities to participate, it's going to become, we need many, 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 many small ways of getting lots and lots and lots of people engaged in both ways, information in and then opportunities back out. Let me take another question, and then I will promise to answer the deep-seated psychological neurosis that drives me, or avoid, or maybe successfully run out of time before I have to. Thank you.
You hope.
He's going to stay, he's filibustering until I answer it.
Hi, Beth. Thanks so much for this really inspiring talk where you covered not only the aspects in US, but across the whole world. In fact, my question is related to the comment you just made towards the end of answering the last question nicely segues into my question.
Okay.
So in the book, I think you talk about participatory democracy beyond occasional voting, right? So the question I have is, how do you account for, say, avoiding biases when you collect information from users? Let me give an anecdotal experience I had. This was back in around 2004 when the general elections were being held in India, which is the largest democracy, and the entire English media in the country predicted that the coalition led by BJP will come to power, but the reality was just the opposite. So there's always sometimes maybe the media or the people might have a disconnect based on who they are able to reach out to, maybe to the literate, to the tech savvy, to the people who are on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, but maybe not the people who are getting affected by the problems and who don't have time to participate in such media? I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
A great question. So there's two parts to the question, right, which has to do, one with the legitimacy of participation. We don't want to, you open up a blog on the White House website, you hear from precisely the people you don't need or want to hear from, which is why, and the book is very much concerned with this question of what are the ways in which we can more proactively use technology to reach out to people. So for example, if we're going to create a policy or we need to do something relating to hospitals, how do we find and identify the doctors, the nurses, the patients, the people, so we have the ability to do what every company knows how to do, which is to segment our audience a little bit better, to make sure we take proactive steps to hear from people. Not just because of legitimacy, but because we're going to develop and design a more effective policy if we, quote unquote, talk to our end users, if we practice human-centered design policies. And so that's where we have to not be afraid to do that. It's not, to be clear, to the exclusion of inviting others to participate. It's not saying only the doctors are the people we'll listen to, but to say we have to take that next step. We're spending so much on figuring out how to target somebody to buy toothpaste, right? We use lots of data science to figure out you're more likely to buy toothpaste at 5 o'clock than you are at 9 o'clock, and when you're on the subway and not on the bus, we can do a fraction of that to identify what you know and maybe alert you to an opportunity that speaks to your talents and skills and abilities. It's part of what I'm suggesting here. In the end, to get to the second part of your question, are we ultimately going to make decisions based on values? Are we going to gather lots and lots and lots of data and information and still have people who will say, I don't care, I'm just going to decide what I want to decide? Yes, we will. That's the nature of life in a democracy, and that's where the kicking the bums out and elections come in. But we're able to then have an open conversation about the evidence that supports a decision or doesn't support it, as opposed to today, whereas a colleague of mine likes to say, governing is a largely fact-free zone. So a poor answer to a hard question, but such as the clock is ticking, so I invite comments afterwards. Let me, if you don't mind, take a few, maybe I could gather some questions now,
Thanks.
and hopefully try to answer them all standing on one foot.
Hi there, thanks. I have a question from the stream. So you mentioned the government needs help with marketing, for instance.
Yes.
How can we get involved and contribute without quitting our day jobs at LinkedIn?
I'm just going to say, if you want to quit your day job, you should apply temporarily. If you want to take a sabbatical from your day job, you should definitely think about applying for the Presidential Innovation Fellowship. And if you, second short answer is, by all means, drop me a line, because I know lots of people who would like your help. And that's one of the challenges. So President Obama has committed in the 2017 budget to making more slots available to hire people faster from outside of government into government, to creating more positions, tech positions in government. But I agree that this notion, and there is something called the special government employee at the federal level, and it exists also at the state and local level. In other words, there are lots of vehicles now that exist. It's just a matter of that matching. So I would agree. The problem is it's hard. There isn't a ready bank. And I would like us to create it, right? I would like to think that that's the thing we need to do. So I'll come back to an example that I gave at the beginning, which was the challenge on the criminal justice front, right? So I gave you all this data about you don't even need me to cite you data. We know what a disaster our criminal justice system is, and it's full of people who are mentally ill and who should be in hospitals and shouldn't be in prisons, right? So we created what we call a coaching program. I said, we're gonna help anybody who wants help who's working on data-driven criminal justice. And you know what? I got overnight, I have 45 people from 16 cities, all of whom are state and local officials desperately trying to do data-driven criminal justice reform. And my job is to help get them the help that they need to help them do their job. So I super want to hear from people who want to help, because there are people out there who are boots on the ground, people doing the yeoman's work day to day of trying to make the system work, who are full-time public servants, who desperately would love to hear from you. So it's not that hard, but we have to do more of it. And I'll give you just one more example because I'm so passionate about this. I got asked the other day, can I recommend a big data person to help Brazil with Zika? I said, you want me to pick one person in my Rolodex? Sorry, for all those of you who are under the age of 30, a Rolodex, do you know what a Rolodex is? I do this with my students blank, like what is that? So they wanted one person. I said, I can't pick one person. Depends on the nature of the problem. What's the problem? Is it standing water? Is it getting bitten? Is it vaccines? What's the issue? So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to stand up a set of online meetings. We're just going to crowdsource it. We're going to have a bunch of essentially 10 online conferences that will start. We have 3 countries in Latin America eager for the help who've signed on to partner with us. And we want people to tell us that you know things about marketing. This is where I'm going to get back to the question, is one of them, because a big challenge is how do I deliver public messages to people without creating a panic? How do I tell them when to get vaccinated? How do I tell them how to get tested? We need marketing professionals like this. In other words, it's not that hard. You got a problem? We have an internet? Boom. We just have to put the two sides together. So we're starting. But at Beth Noveck on Twitter, I'm ready to match you to people. I'm not very scalable, but I'm ready to help, and I think there are more institutions that are thinking about how to do this in a more systematic way. Okay, sorry,
Great,
I went
thanks.
on too long. Thank you to the stream.
Thanks for coming, and I think you may have answered this question, but I'll ask this anyway. One of the things that makes me get up in the morning is the fact that I help people find jobs. I work on LinkedIn Jobs. I want to help people find public service jobs. So how can we help?
So I'm going to, to keep Rochelle happy, if you don't mind, I'm going to take the 3 questions that are waiting, and then I'm going to attempt to answer them. Does that work? Or not answer them? So why don't we take the next question? Okay. Does that work, Rochelle? Okay. I don't want to risk running out of time to hear from your. So okay. Let's take the next person, and then I'll answer all 3 at the same time.
I can see a lot of interesting businesses and startups in government or to help governments, but I have yet to figure out a business model that can actually work and help pay the bills. Anything that can unlock that government money for public good. And just curious your suggestions there.
Okay, one more.
So I was wondering if to address both the problems of supply of people with relevant skills and motivation to help solve that problem, you've thought about tapping into things like coding boot camps and data science boot camps, where they're a pool of people who are learning those skills, building them, and have this intrinsic motivation to apply those skills in a way that will help them better their careers and get a job.
Okay. All right, I've stalled long enough. So let me see if I can take these in order. So again, the question about how do we help people find jobs in the public? How do we help people find jobs in the public sector? There is, by the way, and I know that you mine it. USA Jobs is a source of jobs. The biggest challenge, though, is that to date is this problem that we call people things in hierarchical organizations, particularly public organizations. We call people things like assistant, deputy, blah-de-blah, which is a terrible way. It's great for kind of helping people advance in their careers and knowing what the next step is, but it's a terrible way to actually match skills and expertise to the appropriate role. It's a terrible way to think about or to rethink how we organize teams. So one of my favorite stories on this front comes from Danny Hillis, of Applied Minds and Disney Imagineering and longtime kind of entrepreneur, who, as you know, was created a project. You may remember that before there was the Google Knowledge Graph, there was MetaWeb, and before there was MetaWeb, there was Freebase, and before there was Freebase, it was called Aristotle, meaning Alexander the Great's tutor who knew all, right? So it was called Aristotle, and one of the first applications for Aristotle was within the Defense Department to catalog the skills and know-how of people in the Defense Department. Why? And here's the story that he tells. which is they were having a challenge in Afghanistan with the downing of Apache helicopters. The dust was very fine-grained and would get into the rotors of the helicopters and cause them to crash. And so the people trying to solve this problem, it turns out the guy whose job it was to solve this problem, by accident, finds out that the person sitting across from him has had 9 years of experience flying the Apache helicopter. It's not his day job today, and so he had no idea. It was just by accident that he came across it. And the question was, how do we accelerate, how do we make those connections without having them happen by happenstance? That project failed and was scuttled. Originally, it's now been revived just this year, not under this name and with new technology. It was scuttled because there was no research back of it. When Congress came calling and said, what are you spending money on? There was no ability to give an answer about the ways in which this use of technology was helping solve problems, save money, change how people worked in any way that was measurable. So this is a long way of saying that one of the ways that we're going to accelerate our path towards this kind of future is by also coupling it with some research that actually allows us to generate evidence. So when Health and Human Services starts staffing those medical device review panels, using their expert networking software, which also pulls from LinkedIn, I might add, as well as citation databases and other things to figure out what people know, they need to do the job of knowing, does that actually help them examine a medical device faster, better, cheaper, avoiding litigation, making people safer? There's some measurable impact from it. So I just want to put in a plug for research that are going to help people to do that. But I think the question itself is still an open question about the ways in which we're going to do that. In terms of public good money for doing this, well, the short answer is there's also a thing called SBA grants. Small business grants, which are one source of money for doing this. There is some interest now in funding through places like DARPA and NSF, but there's a tremendous need for more push around funding research about what makes government work better. So NSF spends tons of money, for example, on private sector cloud research, and then the government has to go and buy cloud services and has no idea what cloud to buy, right? So we spend very little internal to government on actual research around how we make those institutions work better. And that's a place we need to invest more money, but there are increasing sources of money that can be tapped into in new ways. And I think, it's a lucrative space, and these are good jobs also that people want to have that come with some security and decent pay and decent money. And I agree with the last suggestion, which was that there is a supply of people. There are people going to hackathons, they're going to boot camps, they want to help. There's lots of examples of this. I gave you the tip of the iceberg in terms of examples in the deck that I had, all of which reflect people wanting to do well by doing good. And some of them are people working in their spare time, right? So they have a day job, but they're using their, what used to be called 20% time. People at Google tell me it's now called 120% time. So it's using that time, that extra time, to give of your skills and ability to help. But we do need to push the needle forward in terms of creating more of those opportunities that look like Pulsepoint. You should all go sign up. First, you should all go get CPR certified, and then you should all sign up for Pulsepoint. But what we need from the next president, from the next administration, for what we need going forward is many, many more things like this. So that, for example, in New York City, a very diverse place, there is a very little known database of language skills among people who work in the public sector, right? Because there's somebody who's standing in line at the DMV who needs to be able, who can't transact in English, and there's nobody at the DMV who happens to speak X, so they can pull from that database that allows them to, again, match a skill to an opportunity to serve. So we're beginning to see this, but it's just the beginning. And I'd like to think that if we come back in 5 years, and we have this conversation again, or maybe in 4 years after the next administration has finished. Again, no promises. And so whether we have this talk here, or we're all in New Zealand and Australia when we've emigrated and having this talk, we will hopefully be able to talk about institutions that are consuming their own data, that are more conversational with people, that are working with companies on accessing their data to do public good, and where it's easily possible for me to know tomorrow, I have a skill, it might be data science, it might be marketing, maybe I know how to cook really well, that I can figure out ways to put that to good for the public interest. So Bill Gates is calling for it. We're going to have the data for it. I'm looking forward to the future we're going to look back on 5 years from now. And I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming and sharing all this insightful information. And we are all about connecting skills with opportunities, so it's very, very relevant for all of us. So
Coles to Newcastle.
Yes. So Beth is going to be sticking around to sign books if you're in the room. And then also a reminder to everyone, you can watch this it'll be on YouTube, it'll be on SlideShare, we'll have a podcast. You can send it to your friends, watch it many times. It'll be out there. So thanks again for coming.
Great. Thank you.